Hello, Scott Rogan here, founder, lead designer of Rogue Home Cinema, and we're back with another expert panel podcast video review of brand new products and brand new technologies, actually cutting edge technologies in the video scene. It's only one of the most exciting and most riveting components of cinema, of course, is video. We're joined by the team at Barco Residential, who are all about creating actually real cinema in your own home. Great to chat to you again, guys. We've got Andy Jones here, sales engineer. Hello, Andy.
Hey, Scott. How are you?
Great. And also Bart Devos, who is the business development manager for EMA and APAC regions around the world. G'day, Bart.
Hey, Scott.
Awesome. So guys, we've actually connected a little bit lately over some exciting projects that we're engineering for some projects in Perth, where I'm from. But today, it's all about actually the introduction of some brand new products and some game-changing technology from what I see. So, Bart, I'll let you take it away. What's some of the big news happening right now from Barco Residential?
Thank you very much, Scott. Yeah, indeed. Well, the ideal is to have a chat today about Njord, but also about the exciting new feature that you're referencing to, which is the Dynablack functionality. So this was added with the latest firmware update back in March, and that is where we start with the introduction of, the name hints at it, of course, dynamic black. So what it does there is offer the next level of image performance, where you're going to have even better performance when it comes to contrast ratios and whatnot. And we're starting that off with Njord. Njord being one of the more recent product introductions that we did September last year, and I mean, just a fantastic looking unit. That's perfectly positioned for addressing the ever growing demand for larger screens, because when we speak to partners, when we speak to clients, it seems like, what's the next step? What's the next level that we can go to in terms of screen size? Because people have seen 3 and 4 meter wide screens, but they want to do better. They want to do bigger. They've understood that they can get bigger, and also they found out that if you want to go bigger, you're going to want to have a powerful, bright projector, but not only bright, but also having good color performance, good saturation, good representation of fast-moving images on the screen, and of course having great contrast. And then having the Dynablack introduced on that one first made perfect sense.
Wow. So the Njord and a lot of the Barco Residential, in fact, all of them are named off. Is it stars? Gods of the stars. Bragi with Thor, with Freya. And now Njord. So Njord is this is a higher end unit. We've got the single chip products, so the first sort of 3 in the range, which we've talked about in another podcast. And the Njord would be the first 3 chip, I believe, unit, which is allowing. Ultimately, what does 3 chip do? I guess this is where the high brightness really kicks into things.
Amongst other things, indeed. But yeah, where should we start? I mean, it's just the next step up in overall picture quality, right? I mean, there's benefits to single chip, there's benefits to the 3 chip as well, for sure. But the main thing with the Njord is indeed it gives you the option or the ability to go up to around 11,500, let's say 12,000 Ansi lumens of light output, and doing so in full P3 DCI color space. So if you translate that into the real world, because I mean, these are all facts and figures, but what does that mean in the real world? Well, in reality, it means you can easily do screen sizes of 6 meters, 6.5, 7 meter wide even, and still get tremendous light output. Assuming, of course, you're using it with the right screen, you spec everything correctly, but this is going to provide a fantastic HDR experience. So if you're talking about, what do we recommend? Or what do we feel is great or required to get great HDR performance? Well, we would always say target for at least 40-foot Lamberts post calibration. That's something that sometimes is forgotten by partners. Also, other manufacturers tend to want to forget about this fact. but you have to calibrate each and every projector to get it optimized for the specific installation, your specific screen in that specific room with that specific lens, etc. And all these little things come together at the end, and they do have an impact on what is displayed. So video calibration is required. You're going to lose a bit of light post-calibration, and that's why it's good to have the headroom. Just like with audio, it's nice to have headroom. Well, the same applies for video projection. It's nice to have that headroom. And when you got 11,500, 12,000 lumens on tap, that's plenty.
Wow. And Andy, so tell us with the, so we're talking about HDR light outputs of 40-foot lamps, just putting that into context of what typical HD or SDR video, what does that usually require? What do we usually see at the commercial cinema versus these new exceedingly high targets in the whole HDR home ultra HD world?
Yeah, of course. So SDR, we typically in the residential market aim to achieve in the region of 20 to 24 foot lamberts calibrated. For HDR, it does depend on the projector slightly. Typically speaking, we tend to recommend 40-foot lamberts as the required specification.
So only about double, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
That said, when we start to look at our more higher powered 3-chip projectors like the Njord, or even stepping up to products like the Freya, Prometheus or Thor, actually we can often go even higher still with the light output because we have the improved contrast ratio. So for example, on those products we could quite happily go 50-foot lamberts as an example.
Wow.
That tends to give us better spectral highlights and a greater dynamic range. So we can play around with that a little bit, but 40-foot lamberts would be kind of minimum target where possible.
Okay. Awesome. So, and of course, HDR, it's about against it'd be like in audio, you have those moments of spontaneous peaks of dynamics, which we want to hear loud and clear, no distortion, and it's this range that starts to give us the sense of realism. Life almost always seems to be about contrast. And dynamics, it's what attracts us and makes things, I guess, all relevant. So with the light output, I guess, it's a bit like with audio, we typically run around 85 dB, but it can peak up to 105, 115 or so off the base. Yeah. So with video, I guess, would it be fair to say that most of the video would probably, with well-calibrated HDR, sit around that typical 20 foot, because that's about as much life as we seem to want kind of pumping at us off a big screen, and then the 40 foot's there for those sort of peaks and highlights. Is that how it works?
Essentially, yes. I mean, it will depend on the movie you're watching, etc. So some movies are inherently slightly darker anyway. If you watch a good horror film, for example, they're often set in medium low light settings, and you might see, if you're panning across the sky, for example, a star in the sky might hit that peak of 40-foot lamberts as an example. Yeah. But then you could watch something like an Avengers movie where much of those are set during the daytime with bright sun, so on and so forth. So actually there could be times where that's pretty bright most of the time. But obviously that, as you rightly say, we have that peak brightness to create those highlights. So you're right. Well, the image won't be 40-foot lamberts all of the time, because that would be fatiguing to watch. So it's going to be less than that, but that brightness allows us to create that dynamic range. And the whole idea of HDR is to try and take projection and video displays in general one step closer to what the human eye sees. We have much greater dynamic range than we can display, but like the human eye, the dynamic range of movie content is exactly that. It's dynamic. So in a dark scene our range drops down, and in a bright scene our range elevates, which is exactly how our eye works with the pupil opening and closing. So we're trying to recreate that, and also trying to expand the color gamut and color volume, so that we can see more detail and shades of color, which again help to make the image more realistic.
That's a good point. Is the not just overall brightness, but output with saturated color, and that's one of those trade-offs of, you know, do you want it strong or cheap, right? So you usually get to pick, you know, there's that trifecta that we know of,
Exactly.
and we want lots of light, but then we need to saturate lots of color, which inherently drops the light, which means we need to start with a lot more light to end up getting it onto the screen with that sort of richness, which is why the Njord has obviously been released for actually delivering the color and the brightness, and then times by another sort of triple almost of what the Loki projector has for output at P3 color, to get it on a screen at, you know, what was it, about six meters? Is the Njord's happy for?
Up to 7 meters,
Wow.
but obviously it's going to be a little bit more comfortable at 6 meters, for example.
Wow.
We'll have a bit of headroom there, I'd say.
Cool, and that's designed to hit the 40-foot dynamics with the P3 color space, the commercial color space.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
Wow. That's awesome. So, and I guess this would be for cinemas that would be probably like 4 or 5 sort of rows of depth. A screen size that sort of size would start to support quite a large cinema.
Yeah, I mean, you would think so, yes, but I would also comment that you know, the Njord is capable of producing up to a 6-7 meter wide image, but on the same token, it's also perfectly comfortable on a, you know, 3.5-4 meter wide image, because being laser technology, we can attenuate the laser. So, you know, at 100% brightness or 100% laser power, obviously we'll create that 12,000 Ansi lumens, but we can reduce down that power so that if we're projecting onto a 4 meter screen, you know, we're not burning the retinas out the back of viewers' eyes because it's, you know, for argument's sake, 120 foot Lamberts. So
wow.
I wouldn't like to pigeonhole it and say it's only for the very largest rooms. I would say it's for, you know, discerning customers that want the best image quality.
Wow, cool, good point. And I don't think we mentioned, its light source was this is a laser phosphorus. So this is a one laser system that ends up through the various components to
Correct.
create a white
Correct.
light, a single white light. And then you can rail that up. And so, okay, so you could, because a typical laser would last like how long? Like maybe 20,000 hours, something like that.
Correct, yeah. So the light source in the Njord is rated at 20,000 hours, which, if you do the math, if you were to watch, I forget whether it's 7 or 8 hours a day, but every day of the year for 7 years, you just peak above 20,000 hours.
Wow.
So for residential use, yeah, unless you've got a real movie enthusiast that's watching a couple of movies every single night, you shouldn't touch that realistically with this projector. And that's only when we get down to half brightness, down to 50% of the laser.
And if we're on a smaller screen and backed off the laser, that would give it more lifespan, I guess?
Yes,
Indeed.
correct.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if we can have a Njord on a 3 meter wide screen, you can just pretty much, you know, run it all day, run it for the kids and the dog where it works. So
Absolutely.
amazing. So awesome. What other now? We got Dyna Black. Before we get to Dyna Black, anything else special about the Njord or Njord? Sorry, say that right. Now, with most Barco projectors, there's specific or special lenses available. So no doubt this is a bit of a different lens system to the Bragi, Bowder and Loki. They're sort of the single chip series of projector. Does Njord require some other or special lenses?
The Njord takes it up a step in terms of the lenses that it's using. So for the Njord series, we are using the TLD Plus family of lenses. And there indeed you got a huge variety of lens selections to make sure that we've got a lens that will work for each and every installation. So going from ultra short throw all the way to very long ones. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, we go from 0.41 to 1 for the UST all the way up to 10.83 to 1 on the other end. And we do that over a variety of 9 different lenses.
Wow.
And that's what allows us to keep the light output as high as possible throughout that specific range of that specific lens. So unlike other manufacturers where you'll see quite a big stretch, let's say, between both ends of a specific lens's throw ratio, that means you'll be sacrificing quite a bit of light output if you happen to be on the wrong end, so to speak, for that particular installation. And that's what we avoid with our philosophy and our variety of lenses that we have on offer.
So just
and then the other element I would say that is very interesting about Njord is that it being part of our Pulse platform of projectors, it comes of course equipped with all the bells and whistles that are familiar to the other products in our lineup in the Pulse platform, which means you've got access to the warp engine if necessary, and that is fantastic for challenging installations, let's say, because that's something that we still feel tends to get overlooked, unfortunately. I mean, we are informed sometimes about projects where people then say, oh yeah, we couldn't make it work, and in the end we went for a big flat screen TV. And we were like, okay, too bad. I mean, the thing has been installed, the project has been finished by now, but can we have a look at the drawings, the schematics of the room, just for interest? And then if you have a look at it and you take a step back, and we show what we can do with our technology in combination with stuff like mirror mounts, for example, all of a sudden people realize that a big projector like the Njord, which is quite long or deep if you would like, if you just project vertically, then all of a sudden the height of the projector becomes the depth of the projector. And you save a lot of space. So all of a sudden that projector that you could not install, problem solved, it's hidden away. And yeah, I mean, that's going to enable, of course, having a big screen, and having a 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever meter wide screen is of course always going to be much more wow and much more immersive than the biggest flat screen TV you can buy.
Wow, yeah. So with and I guess in a more ambient lit space, that's where also light output becomes a big deal. We need to have some real grunt rather than just a dedicated cinema. So the Njord could be installed lower profile, mirrored to project the image, the beam out through whatever cabinetry, across the pool to the other side of the alfresco onto a maybe a fancy screen that pops up, and you've got like 5-6 meter wide P3 HDR image just coming out of almost nowhere, even in an entertainment area.
Correct.
And with the warp engine, you can, if it's got some funny angles, it can help to correct and manage any of the maybe less than perfect lens arrangement. So, wow, yeah. So there's not too many excuses. It's like if someone can kind of dream it and want it, it's like chances are it can be done.
That is an accurate statement. Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing that we want to point out there about the warping capabilities that we have on board is that, of course, it's way beyond what is typically known as standard keystone correction, because the warping capabilities that we have are from our simulation division within Barco. And if you think about what we're doing there you're talking about probably the most demanding clients that are out there: flight simulation, defense simulation, Formula One teams, for example, that are using this kind of technology. So you're talking, situations where it's a matter of life and death, where it's a matter of winning or losing the race. So everything needs to happen super fast and needs to happen at the maximum amount of image quality that is available.
Yeah, well, because they've got screens that aren't always flat. They're curved, and so the warp engine wraps and ensures that immersion. So I know keystone's a bit of a dirty word typically in the home cinema projection world, mainly because the projectors that were attempting to keystone were so terrible at image processing that they really harmed the picture. Though when we're talking at a professional level image warp or control, such as the simulation. So the simulation world and that pro world, that's the same technologies that are plonked into the Barco Residential. Is that right? Just as powerful.
That is correct, yeah.
Boom. Love that. The other big tech, you're welcome to throw something else in there, but we want to move to this Dynablack, which is new release on this model unit, but it's said to be rolling this technology through software update back into some of the other Pulse models, which we've done a lot of. We got a lot of clients with those, and there's nothing more exciting than calling on a client, say we're going to come out and do a service call, and by the way, we're actually going to do some updates and increase the performance of their existing system. So each time we do a service call, we're leaving with them going, wow, I've got an even better cinema than before, which is super cool. I guess people are beginning to notice that trend with phones getting firmware updates and getting smarter, and apparently even Tesla motor vehicles getting more horsepower through a software update. It's the same for the Barco products. You guys are constantly working on these platforms all the time. So that's going to be awesome. But tell us about what Dynablack really is and what that's doing for the picture.
The introduction of Dynablack is, it's going to improve contrast ratio, plain and simple, and it's going to increase the dynamic contrast to, I want to say 20,000 to 1. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's where we should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where is it now for and when you say what is dynamic contrast, because contrast is a pretty loosely used term, or at least as far as how different brands actually rate their contrast ratio. It's like having a drag race, but with a running start with some of them. So
correct. Yeah. It's well worth defining the differences. So there are typically three specifications that you'll often see. I say three specifications you'll often see. There are three ways that are typically used to measure contrast. You don't often see all three. Sequential, or on-off contrast, as it can be called, which is where a manufacturer would put up a full field white test pattern, measure that, so they'd get a peak white luminance, a full field black test pattern, and then they would calculate the contrast ratio from that. So that's literally one frame all black, one frame all white. Very unrealistic in terms of the way that we view content, but will give a large marketing value or number at the end of it.
Probably actually just furthermore on that, if I jump in, is also they could do this uncalibrated. That is, the light engine's wide open, dumping as much light to the other side of the room as possible, without any form of color balance at all, which naturally can only detract from the overall output. Yeah.
Correct, exactly. Once you've calibrated a projector, you will typically lose 10 to 15% of the light output, assuming the projector's light output hasn't been specified at a given color point, typically D65. So yes, you would get a large, impressive marketing value or figure doing it that way. The other way that we often specify in our data sheets, because it's far more representative of how we view content, is Ansi contrast. So that's where we display a black and white checker pattern. So 4x4, black, white, black, white, black, white. Measure each segment of that, and then we then invert that pattern and measure each segment again. And from that, we calculate the contrast ratio. And that's far more representative of how we watch content, because content isn't black or white, it's a mixture of both. And we then get some level of stray light within the room from the white and the black. So that will help balance that out also. The downside with that is you don't typically end up with a very impressive contrast ratio on paper. Most viewers would probably be incredibly shocked to hear that a very, very good Ansi contrast ratio in room is 100:1. That's pretty exceptional as an Ansi contrast. And if you consider that there are manufacturers out there claiming contrast ratios of 100,000, 1 million, or infinity to 1.
Infinity's not a very handy number, is it?
Indeed, it puts that into perspective. What dynamic contrast does is we measure the peak whites, but then because we can modulate the black side, effectively we can turn off the illumination system, then it extends that black range, so it generates a deeper black and therefore a larger contrast ratio value.
Okay, so it's all in for white. Then we've got our black level, which would get, say, well, if it was modulated and it was an Ansi test pattern, then it's going to be, I guess the light engines aren't going to dip down for that. But as soon as we get into a mostly black test image or test pattern, then it can,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so effectively what happens is, if you imagine we had a projector set to 100% illumination power, when we create black, there is stray light which elevates that black level slightly. Obviously, if we can modulate that illumination system, i.e. we can reduce it from, say, 100% brightness down to 30% brightness, that level of stray light, which is having an impact on our black level, effectively makes our black level lower.
Okay.
And as a result, we generate a lower black reading, and therefore our dynamic contrast value is greater. And that represents, when we turn on Dynablack within the projector, how the system works. So we can reduce the light source for darker scenes, improving the contrast. And then obviously when you flip to that bright scene outside, the lasers immediately go to 100% brightness potentially without the viewer noticing. So you don't notice that modulation, but you then have the full peak brightness of the content.
I see, because the light engine is now working in controlled very much like as the rest of the system. The pixels are working, color engines are working, the warp engine's potentially working, and the light engine is now part of the actual, rather than just being on, it's every frame, it's actually, wow. Does that put stress on that system, or is it happy to just blast away like that? I guess it's happy.
It's happy. It's designed to be working like that, so it's perfectly happy. And the benefit of things like laser illumination, LED illumination, etc., is you can modulate the video signal or the light signal in that way, and it's almost instant. Certainly from our perspective as a viewer, it's instantaneous.
Whereas if you were to try and do this with a lamp, you're going to have color temperature differences, and that would blow up, no doubt. If you're flashing intensity into a lamp,
you're suddenly stressing the lamp for sure.
Gotcha.
Whereas with laser and LED, they're a lot more stable. You can modulate them in that way that help you create that dynamic contrast.
Well, I've never seen a Star Wars blaster lock up. Those things just keep firing. There's lasers all the way. Okay, that's cool. So the new light technology has actually enabled this to be a reality, and of course the processing. Wow, because I knew there was the ability to control the laser output, and say the Bowder. That's the first of the recent Barco products, or of the current models that we put in some years ago, and we could control the laser light. So this new software update means that while it's managing the picture, it can you can manage the laser and do it at that pace. So that's radical. Was that sort of on the cards when that was built, or is that something where later on it's like, hey, we can do this as well?
The simple answer is I don't know. Is the honest answer. I would assume that our R&D department specified laser phosphor technology in the knowledge that they had the capabilities of doing that. Mm-hmm. But like all these things, obviously we have a list of features that we want to bring to market, and we have to prioritize those, and that is always an ever-changing list. And obviously some things are easier or harder to implement. So I'm sure we were well aware that we could do that in advance, but have only just brought it to market. And I suppose with this projector it becomes very relevant too, because we have that highlight output that obviously we want to be able to manage that black level and ensure that it's faithful to the contents as well.
Yeah, of course. So you don't want to add a feature which is now exaggerating, but like sports mode on a TV, it exaggerates all the green, it looks wrong. So it's about increasing the authenticity or the capability of the true projection system, and then whatever's played back inside that is simply extended but true. Makes a lot of sense. I know there's a scene on Terminator, the latest Terminator, Dark Fate, and they're on the train, and there's no light on that scene. And you'd think they would give us a bit of moonlight to see the characters, but I just don't think it was the greatest piece of video, because it was just the characters on the train were like maybe 5% grey or light, and the background was black, and the train might have been 3% light. There wasn't much going on, so a scene like that, I guess, is just going to help the image blend in with, we obviously work in, ideally dark cinema rooms, so the dark image around that scene would blend off into the space. So the Njord has the Dyna Black, which is part of the Pulse platform, which means the Bragi, the Bowder, and the Loki, which is definitely the most popular projectors we've been doing of recent. Now, their Pulse platform as well. So does that mean that the Njord Dyna Black technology is going to release downwards, and when might that happen?
That is indeed the plan. Big question, of course, that everybody is asking is when is it indeed expected to come to the other models in the Pulse platform? The intention is to have it around end of this year, again early next year, depending on how things progress.
Okay, cool. So my client with the Bowder, that's about 3.5 years in. Later,
we'll get that. We'll get that boost in performance. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. That's super cool. So we've got the Pulse platform unit, which is now the Bragi, the Bowder, the Loki, and the Njord. That's the 4 in that family. Is that right?
And the Medea.
Yeah,
on the Medea, sorry, I forget the Medea. I'm all about my P3 color, so I forget about the Medea.
Yeah, well, I've been saying it for a long time now, actually. I mean, it started out as, something that pops up in a conversation and then it gets repeated. And I mean, I'm at the point now where I think that Medea needs to be revalued, actually, because if you look at what that unit delivers, the bang for the buck, overall quality, image quality, you name it, like I said, the whole package, I mean, I think it's hard to beat at that price, and almost at any price, really. Again, looking at that performance value ratio, you say indeed P3 color, and yes, of course, it's important and it makes a difference. I mean, no doubt about it. But if you look at a calibrated Medea on a good screen and etc. and in the good conditions, it gives other projectors from other manufacturers who claim to be P3, it gives them a run for the money.
Yeah, so it's true HD color, which is the Rec 709 format, but with lots of grunt, right? That is like for how many lumens? How many lumens is that one?
6,500 Ansi lumens, and wider than Rec 709 color space.
Great, great.
So we do exceed Rec 709, but we certainly don't touch upon P3 either. We're kind of probably 50% between the two.
Yeah, well, that's all. Well, I was doing some testing on another unit recently. Won't name brands because this is the Barco show, but that unit was similar lumens, is around 5,500-6,000, laser powered, and I couldn't get Rec 709 out of it. It was a crappy HD color, and for what we do anyway, for maybe in a sports room at a pub and it needs to be really bright and it's got ambient conditions and they use one of those black screen things, probably okay, but ish. But I'm like, man, if I can't hit Rec 709 actually, then it doesn't sort of really belong in a proper video screening room. And I would hope if a casino or a nice sporting room was going to try and do something pretty epic, then yeah, it sounds like that's where the Medea is going to be. But that's really good. Go well beyond Rec 709 when others are just really compromising color, too much for brightness, which is something we see often. Yeah. Also, but of course, the Medea is going to be Dyna Black as well, so that's really cool. Part of the same platform.
Yeah.
Because it's also laser. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, so with the Njord, this is very high lumen output. Does that mean that these safety standards around the installation for something like that? Because there's a thing called the hazard zone, where, of course, if you're too close to the lens and happen to look into it with over 10,000 lumens coming back at you, that can take out someone's vision or potentially damage it. So does the Njord have some particular standards around its installation? Because it's also, I guess, pretty heavy as well. It's no ordinary unit.
Yeah, indeed. So this is something that kind of I have to tackle day in, day out as part of my remit as a sales engineer. So obviously it's a large projector, so it weighs a reasonable amount. If I recall correctly, I think it's best part of 50 kilos, 45 kilos, certainly 50 with the lens.
Yeah.
From a noise perspective, it generates just shy of 50 decibels. So obviously, ideally the type of projector that either requires a hush box or a dedicated projection booth to keep the noise floor of the theatre down. And then as you ask about the hazard zone, which I think we'll probably cover a little bit more in our next video too.
Yeah.
But the projector falls into what we call a risk group 3 class when the throw ratio exceeds 2.3 to 1. So providing the throw is 2.3 times greater than or equal to the screen width, then we would need to review hazard zones. Most installations in the residential market tend to be below that throw range, particularly when we start to look at 5, 6, 7 meter screens, because obviously the distance back to the projector inevitably gets larger with screen size. So we're not talking big auditoriums typically. We're talking large residential rooms, but 10 meters is a pretty large residential room.
Indeed. So the Njord's very exciting, though, as people do get excited about these sorts of technologies and capabilities, understanding that there are specially trained dealers throughout the world that understand the products, understand what it really takes to get one of you don't just open it out of the box and plug it in, right? So there's a lot of work to get these running correctly, and of course you guys are here to support the dealers as well, to make sure that the installation is always bang on, safe, and the performance is delivered to the client. Yeah. So guys, thanks very much. I'd say that's a really great wrap. Awesome to see such exciting innovation come out, not just on new models, but the fact that it rolls back is just, to me, I think one of the big successes of Barco in our business has been the fact that the client knows that this product is a long-term investment in their cinema room, knowing that the support, the longevity, and then even the improvements are there, makes it a bit more of a no-brainer or a great reason to step it up. And then the fact that we're actually representing a true sort of commercial quality of picture that we struggled to promise a client 10, 15 years ago, not least because we didn't have the content that would actually come close to delivering it. So Cinema at Home's definitely evolved a great deal, and it's been awesome connecting with Barco, working with you guys, and then just seeing it go up another level time and again is just awesome.
Yeah, I think you just gave a perfect summary indeed. I mean, 2021 is, apart from, of course, the pandemic circumstances that we're still in, but apart from that, if you're looking at it from a home entertainment point of view, I mean, we're at a level that our whole industry, you know, like you say, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, could only dream of having. And now we have that. We've got high quality audio, we've got high quality video at the professional level, and we're able to bring that into people's houses, into people's apartments. I mean, it's unprecedented, really. Thanks for having us, Scott.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, guys. So there's another wrap with another phenomenal insights to some world-leading real cinema at home. I do have the guys back on next, so check the other video because there's another exciting new cinema projector. So stay tuned for that one, and thanks for watching. We'll see you again.